It is hard to imagine anything scarier than being stranded on a frozen mountain in the middle of winter, but it can happen. Just ask Eric Storm. He and his friends planned a simple hike, but suddenly they were trapped in a whiteout. Before long, their supplies ran out. And when searchers finally got to them, they discovered they had made a horrifying decision. When death comes for you, will you be ready? In the dead of winter, 1959, 9 students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute set out on a hiking trip to northwest Russia. The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an experienced outdoorsman who had guided many expeditions before. His group consisted of 8 others, all physically fit students trained in winter survival. They were headed for the Ural Mountain, a challenge that demanded skill and preparation. But this group was ready. On January 27, 1959, the 9 students left their base and began the journey. It was a tough one. There was deep, powdery snow to wade through. The temperatures dipped to -20 degrees Celsius, and the wind threatened to knock them off their feet. But none of the group had any trouble keeping up. They were making good time and their spirits were high. They expected to reach their destination in 3 days. As the days wore on, they came across nothing but dense woods and heavy snowfall. Finally, on January 31st, they emerged from the trees and onto the slope of a mountain called Kolitsayakal, which in the local Mansi language means dead mountain. The group soon realized they wouldn't be able to go further that day. So they decided to pitch camp on the mountainside and resume their hike in the morning. They didn't realize they would never leave that camp alive. When they unzipped their tent the next morning, February 1st, 1959, they were met with temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius. To make matters worse, they were surrounded by a thick fog, which meant poor visibility and the very real threat of getting lost. Despite the danger, the group insisted on pressing on. There was a forest just 500 meters away, but the students didn't go there. They stayed on the mountainside, pitching their tent on a ridge. They ate breakfast, then started a fire to warm up. But for reasons nobody knows, they never packed up their things. That evening, they huddled around their small fire, eating dinner and drinking hot tea, unaware that a killer waited in the shadows. That night, a storm raged across the mountain. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes, the wind howled, and the temperature dropped. Somewhere in the darkness, an animal howled mournfully. At 1:20 a.m., the earth shook. Most likely a small avalanche. By 4:30 a.m., the tent was ripped open. We don't know exactly what happened that night, but we know that for hours after the tent was torn open, the students were dead. What happened out there in the blizzard? What could be so terrifying it would force 9 well-trained, experienced hikers to abandon their belongings, flee down a mountain in the middle of the night and freeze to death? The next morning, the sun rose over the snow-covered peaks. The storm had passed and the hikers were nowhere to be seen. Their tent lay on the ground, torn open from the inside. Oddly enough, most of their possessions were still there. Warm coats, boots, and backpacks remained untouched. It was as if the hikers had gotten spooked and fled their camp in a hurry, half-dressed, desperate to get away from whatever had frightened them. But why? What could scare them so badly? The students' tracks were found in the snow leading away from the tent. They showed that they had walked slowly down the mountain toward the forest, but there was no sign of panic. However, what the students left behind told a different story. Their tent was slashed from the inside, suggesting a frantic escape. And one of the students had apparently taken off running, judging by the imprint of his boot in the snow. Searchers found the first 2 bodies about 500 meters from the tent, lying by a small fire. One of the hikers, Yuri Krivonashenko, was lying face up while Zina Kolodintseva was on her back. It belonged to one of the group's leaders, Trosheshka. The remaining 5 bodies proved much harder to find. For months, the searchers combed the mountainside, looking for signs of the missing hikers. They eventually found them in a remote ravine, covered in for meters of snow. The discovery shocked everyone. How could the hikers have ended up there? Had they wandered off in a panic and been buried by an avalanche? Not quite. 2 of the 5 had serious injuries. One of them, Lyudmila Dubinina, had a fractured skull. Her injuries were so severe, she couldn't have survived more than a few minutes. Rustem Sloboda, meanwhile, had massive chest injuries. Doctors estimated they would have been caused by an impact equivalent to a car crash. But there was no wound or injury on his body. The other 3 hikers weren't as badly hurt, but they too had suffered traumatic chest injuries. What on earth could have caused such horrific injuries without leaving a mark on the outside? The most puzzling thing of all, what drove the students to flee their camp and head into the dangerous wilderness? The sudden and mysterious death of the group baffled the public and investigators alike. 6 decades later, they still don't have all the answers. But over the years, scientists have come up with some compelling theories. One of the earliest and most popular theories suggests that the students panicked and fled their tent because of a small avalanche. A small avalanche could easily have knocked over the tent and trapped them inside. But this theory doesn't hold up. According to expert analysis, the slope wasn't steep enough for an avalanche. Plus, evidence of an avalanche was weak and the group could easily have climbed out. Next, people began to speculate that the students had stumbled into a top-secret military test, perhaps tanks, rockets, anti-personnel mines. One hiker was even rumored to have seen a red object hurtling through the sky before the incident. Radiation traces were found on some of their clothing, but radiation levels were only slightly above normal background radiation. It didn't prove that they had been exposed to nuclear energy. Finally, a new theory emerged, one that explained why the hikers seemed to have lost their minds. It was suggested that the group had fallen victim to infrasound. You may have experienced this yourself. Low rumbles and vibrations can sometimes travel through the air, particularly around mountains. They can cause feelings of dread, anxiety, fear, and even panic. According to this theory, the students had set up their camp on a peak that was particularly susceptible to infrasound. As the storm raged that night, the wind rushing over the mountain may have generated low-frequency sounds. The infrasound could have made its way into the tent and seeped into the sleeping students' dreams, whispering unspeakable horrors into their subconscious. They woke up in a state of terror, believing that some dark force was hunting them on the mountain. In a panic, they fled their tent, stumbled down the slope, only to succumb to the freezing cold. But does this really explain everything? Some people think not. What about the strange markings on the students' bodies? Could a little-known sonic weapon truly be responsible for a dozen gruesome deaths? Others blame a more sinister culprit, pointing to alleged UFO sightings in the region at the time. Perhaps an extraterrestrial creature attacked the hikers, frightened by their presence in its territory. Maybe it used some kind of advanced sonic weapon to drive the terrified humans away. The creature then killed the slowest ones and carried the rest off into the wilderness, consuming them later. Or maybe the whole thing can be explained by a single word: Yeti. Local legends speak of a large, hairy humanoid that lives in the Ural Mountains. Could this legendary creature have attacked the students? Did it drag the unfortunate hikers into the woods and feast on their flesh? Over the years, countless books, documentaries, and TV shows have attempted to solve the mystery, each coming up with new theories. But the truth is, we don't know what happened to the Dyatlov Pass group. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case, declaring the incident an avalanche. Many scientists and researchers disagree, however, pointing out that the evidence simply doesn't match. The injuries to the hikers' bodies cannot be explained by an avalanche. The tent was torn from the inside, and the group split up in a way that makes no sense. What do you think happened that night? Was it the work of a strange sonic weapon, a crazed man-eating yeti, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below, and before you go, check out these other videos about terrifying mysteries that remain unsolved to this day.